Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing the hidden history of the Balfour Declaration by John Cornelius. What's interesting about the Balfour Declaration is before you ever start studying this topic, you just think it's something that happens in history, like the Emancipation Proclamation or the Gettysburg Address or the Declaration of Independence. But the reality is the Balfour Declaration was part of a series of machinations that moved towards a Jewish state in Palestine. And for anyone who's taken a moment just to scratch, just to dig a little bit below the surface, you realize that the Balfour Declaration was part of a sequence of events instigated by the Jewish lobby, by Zionists, to get America involved in the war as a trade for Britain recognizing a Jewish state in Palestine, or the need for a Jewish home in Palestine. Because you have to ask yourself, in 1917, as there's a stalemate in war and Britain is running out of money, it's at the verge of economic collapse, why is it that it is a foreign policy objective to make sure that there is a Jewish home, national home in Palestine? That's not really the top thing that's on the mind of the British at this time. They're just trying to work through a war. So what we realize is the Jewish lobby had promised to try to bring America into the war as part of that, but the Jews were not content to work on the political level because political machinations can sometimes fail. They had to make sure that other things moved in order to push the political agenda. And this short little article, which there'll be a link in the description for you to find it, sheds some really interesting light on that. So why don't we start by reading the Zimmerman telegram? Now, the Zimmerman telegram was what I would contend, and what I think the author puts forth too, John Cornelius, the push part of this action. That the Zimmerman telegram starts to move things in motion politically in Washington in order to get America involved in the war. So what was the Zimmerman telegram? So it was a coded message sent from Berlin to Washington, D.C. on January the 16th, 1917. So here's the text of the telegram. Strictly confidential. For your excellency's exclusively personal information and transmission to the Imperial Minister at Mexico by safe hands. Telegram number 1. Absolutely confidential, to be personally deciphered. It is our purpose on the 1st of February to commence the unrestricted U-boat war. The attempt will be made to keep America neutral in spite of it all. In case we should not be successful in this, we propose Mexico an alliance upon the following terms: joint conduct of war, joint conclusion of peace, ample financial support, and an agreement on our part that Mexico shall gain back by conquest the territory lost by her at a prior period in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Arrangement as to detail is entrusted to Your Excellency. Your Excellency will make the above known to the President in strict confidence at the moment that war breaks out with the United States, and you will add the suggestion that Japan be requested to take part at once, and that he simultaneously mediate between ourselves and Japan. Please inform the President that the unrestricted use of our U-boats now offers the prospect of forcing England to sue for peace in the course of a few months. Confirm receipt, Zimmerman. Now, if you're not familiar with history, and you might not understand the reference here, is that the telegram is effectively offering Mexico some of the lands that were lost to the United States in exchange for them coming into the war with them, because they don't want the U.S. to come into the war. They know that this is a variable. The war has come to a stalemate really in this time in 1916, 1917, and the Germans don't really want to have the U.S. come in, but if they do have the U.S. come in, they want to offset that by having the U.S. be tied on its own continent with potential war from Mexico. So this telegram is sent to the ambassador in D.C. for two purposes. One, please let the Americans know we're going to restart submarine warfare and that we hope that this will end things with England. And not to be told to the Americans, to be cabled on further to the ambassador in Mexico, by the way, if this doesn't work out, that America does do something, then we should propose joint action with Mexico. So where did the Zimmerman telegram come from? Did the Germans just suddenly have a bright idea to try to upset the Americans? Or was the idea perhaps suggested to them? Perhaps suggested by agents that were well placed and that had every reason to get the Americans involved. Once it became clear in the fall of 1916 that the Battle of the Somme would not result in the German armies being forced out of France, the British, with their resources approaching exhaustion, had to consider what to do next. Herbert Asquith, who had been Prime Minister since 1908, had begun, reluctantly, to consider a negotiated peace, but negotiations with the Zionists, through Weizmann and Balfour, provided another option for Britain, although not for Asquith. That option was the possibility of a formal, but secret, alliance between the Zionists and the monarchy, whereby the British monarchy would undertake to facilitate the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine, and the Zionists would undertake to help bring America into the war on the side of the Allies, thus assuring an Allied victory. An agreement with the British government would certainly be necessary, but British governments come and go, and a commitment from something less ephemeral than a British government would have been required by the Zionists. So if you have an agreement with the Crown, it won't matter which prime minister you made an agreement with because they might be gone. It is proposed that such a secret agreement took place. There seems to be no way to date it accurately, but it seems likely to have occurred sometime in October 1916. Once a formal agreement was in place, the next step was to arrange for several changes in personnel on both the British and the German sides. The first change was in the leadership of Room 40, the name given the British code-breaking organization. Room 40 was destined to play a key role in the vast deception to follow, and it was necessary to have a trusted actor at its head. Room 40 was first set up in the fall of 1914 under the direction of Alfred Ewing, who retained that position until October 1916. At that time, Ewing was replaced by Captain Reginald Hall, Director of Naval Intelligence. Balfour found a suitable position for Ewing in academia. In Germany, Gottlieb von Jagow, who had been foreign minister since 1913, resigned in November 1916 over the issue of unrestricted submarine warfare, which he opposed. Speaking of the situation in Berlin at that time, the then German ambassador to the U.S. stated, "The unrestricted submarine campaign was only made possible by the resignation of Herr von Jagow, who was the chief opponent of the submarine campaign, and as long as Herr von Jagow remained Secretary of State, a breach with the United States was regarded as impossible." Von Jagow was replaced by Arthur Zimmermann, Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs since 1911. Before 1914, Berlin was the center of Zionist activity, and in 1912, the organization, which was to become the Technion, or Israel Institute of Technology, in Haifa, had placed itself under the protection of Germany, and Zimmermann had arranged with the Turkish government for the purchase of land and the erection of a building. Zimmermann clearly enjoyed good relations with German Zionists and was thus susceptible to Zionist influence. In November 1916, Woodrow Wilson was re-elected to a second term as U.S. President with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." It was understood that Wilson's aim was to bring about a negotiated end to the war without victory for either side. In early December 1916, a political crisis, probably engineered, occurred in Britain, and Herbert Asquith, who had been Prime Minister since 1908, was forced to resign. The denouement came on December 6, 1916. That afternoon, King George V summoned several prominent political figures, including Balfour and Lloyd George, to a conference at Buckingham Palace. Later that same evening, Balfour received a small political delegation which proposed that the difficult political situation could be resolved with Lloyd George as Prime Minister, provided Balfour would agree to accept the position of Foreign Minister, which he did. Lloyd George then quickly imposed a war dictatorship, and the direction of the war was entrusted to a war cabinet of 5 members, including himself as Prime Minister and Balfour as Foreign Minister. Mark Sykes was named Secretary, Mark Sykes of Sykes-Picot. At that point, all necessary changes in personnel had been accomplished. On December the 18th, 1916, the American ambassador to Britain conveyed an offer of peace on behalf of the Central Powers to the Allies. On the following day, David Lloyd George, in his first speech to Parliament as Prime Minister, heaped scorn on the peace proposal and vowed that Britain and its allies would fight on until victory. In retrospect, it seems clear that this speech was a bluff and was meant to goad the Germans into resuming unrestricted submarine warfare. This was indeed the case as indicated by a series of messages from the U.S. ambassador to Britain, Walter Page, to President Wilson and the Secretary of State, written in June 1917. These messages make it clear that Britain was on the verge of financial collapse and that only American support could avert disaster. These messages were made public only in 1925 and are, in my opinion, too little known. On January the 9th, 1917, the German government made the fateful decision to resume unrestricted submarine warfare at the beginning of the following month. Date unknown, what would come to be known as the Zimmermann telegram was concocted in London. My source for this information is a letter to the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, written in response to my first article by author Russell Warren Howe. Howe stated that he had been taught at Cambridge that the Zimmermann telegram was concocted in London to encourage Washington to join the Allies against the Central Powers. My first reaction to this letter was doubt, because Zimmermann subsequently accepted responsibility for the Zimmermann telegram. But of course he had to, because he was responsible, even if the idea came from someone else. Date unknown, possibly before the previous two entries, the key to German Code 7500, in which the Zimmermann telegram was to be sent, was provided to Room 40 by an informant. Howe states that Britain broke Code 7500 a few weeks before the Zimmermann telegram. By broke, he presumably means acquired. So the distinction that being made here is that not that Britain was able to break the code, but that they got a copy of the key to the code through espionage, and that's how they were able to decode the Zimmermann telegram. Date unknown, one Herr von Chemnitz, an East Asia expert in the German Foreign Office and presumably a Zionist agent, presented Zimmermann with the text of a proposed telegram that he had supposedly drafted but had more likely received from London. Against the opposition of some of his colleagues, he persuaded Foreign Minister Zimmermann to send it. On January the 16th, 1917, two telegrams were sent sequentially by cable from Foreign Minister Zimmermann in Berlin to the German ambassador in Washington, Count Bernstorff. The first, which both Zimmermann and Bernstorff considered to be by far the more important, informed Bernstorff of the decision to resume unrestricted submarine warfare on February the 1st, 1917, and gave him instructions on when and how to inform the American government. The second was what has come to be known as the Zimmermann telegram. The second telegram was relayed to the German embassy in Mexico City on January the 19th, 1917. The British intercepted the Zimmermann telegram on the day it was sent and promptly decoded it. It should be noted that Zimmermann sent the telegram on his own authority. Neither the Kaiser nor the Chancellor knew anything of it until it was made public in America. After seeing these cables, Bernstorff attempted to have the German government rescind the unrestricted submarine warfare decision, but was unsuccessful. So if you understand the events up to this point, we have a Zionist agent with the assistance of London drafting what a provocative telegram would look like. He then suggests it to Zimmermann. Zimmermann accepts it because he's susceptible to Zionist influences and transmits it. At this point, the die is cast. The Zionists have done everything on their side to provoke the Americans. Now we need the Americans to take the bait. January the 31st, 1917, Bernstorff informed the U.S. government that unrestricted submarine warfare would commence the following day. A few days later, February the 3rd, 1917, the U.S. broke off diplomatic relations with Germany, and Bernstorff was told to leave the U.S. There are a lot more dates, but for purposes of this review, I'm just going to skip to a few more. April the 2nd, 1917, President Wilson addressed Congress. He spoke of the wonderful and heartening events in Russia, stated that the world needs to be safe for democracy, and asked Congress to declare war on Germany. April the 6th, 1917, Congress declared war on Germany. August the 6th, 1917, Zimmermann replaced as foreign minister. November the 2nd, 1917, Arthur Balfour sent a letter, including what has come to be known as the Balfour Declaration, to Lord Walter Rothschild. For a number of years, it was not known that the Balfour Declaration took this form. Lord Balfour's obituary in the New York Times of March 20th, 1930 stated, that the Balfour Declaration was the text of a speech delivered by Balfour on November the 4th, 1917. It was not a speech, it was a letter, and we have the proof of that to this day. So the rest of the article goes deeper into how can we know that Room 40 did not decode the German code, that they were simply given a key to the code. Well, there are 5 different books that the author cites which have conflicting information in them. And again, this is just a review, so I'm going to only talk about one of them. I'm just going to encourage you that this article is not long. I want to say it's maybe 25, 30 pages. So I'm going to leave it to you to read it and think and reflect on your own. But this is the second book that was cited, which is called Arthur James Balfour, which was written by Blanche Dugdale. Blanche Dugdale was the niece of Lord Balfour. And here's the text from chapter 10. Ever since the middle of January, however, a piece of information had been in the possession of the British government, which would move, if anything could, the vast populations behind the Atlantic seaboard states, who still read of the European war with as much detachment as if it had been raging on the moon. This was the famous telegram from Zimmermann, the German foreign minister, to the German minister in Mexico, instructing him, if and when the United States should enter the war on the Allied side, to propose to Mexico an alliance which would restore to her, when peace came, her lost territories in Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. The method by which this information had reached the British intelligence service made it impossible for some time to communicate it to the United States government. Why? Therefore, for over a month Balfour read his dispatches from Washington of the slow awakening of the American will to war, but could do nothing to hasten the process, till, at last, information about the Mexican plot reached London through channels which enabled the intelligence service to cover up the traces of how it had first been got. So that's the text from the book. Cornelius now continues, this appears to open the possibility that the British government obtained either the Zimmermann telegram or the code in which it was sent from an informant, rather than by code breaking, and in any case indicates that the British possessed the full text of the Zimmermann telegram shortly after it was sent, which, if you're the one who composed the Zimmermann telegram in the first place, then it would be fairly easy to say that, wow, look, we decoded it, aren't we awesome? And the fourth book that Cornelius refers to is by, unfortunately for me, one of my favorite authors, Barbara Tuchman. It turns out that she's complicit in a cover-up. The fourth book to be considered is The Zimmermann Telegram by Barbara Tuchman. This work first appeared in 1958, and a second edition appeared in 1966 after F&M was declassified in 1965. The F&M book was another book that Cornelius cites, which was written by code breakers, people who are experts in cryptography, who talk about the impossibility of the British having decoded this code 7500, which the Germans were using. The first edition of Tuchman's book states that the British picked up the encoded ZT by wireless on January the 16th, 1917, and found it to be in code 13042, which was related to codes the British already had deciphered. They were thus able, in short order, to produce a nearly complete copy of the decoded ZT. But in fact, the ZT was transmitted by cable, not radio, and encrypted in code 7500, not 13042. Normally, the second edition of a book provides an opportunity, and also the duty, for an author to correct errors in the first edition. That did not happen with this book. The text is unchanged, but a preface to the new edition has been added. In it, Tuchman reports the declassification of F&M, this text we were talking about, and acknowledges that it appears to modify my account, a gross understatement. She acknowledges having been aware of the existence of F&M, and acknowledges having been in contact with Friedman, but professes to have been unaware of the content of the book. You write a book about the Zimmermann telegram, but I can't possibly know about other books written about the Zimmermann telegram. The heart of Tuchman's book is the detailed story in Chapter 1 of how the British deciphered the Zimmermann telegram on January the 16th, 1917. But a reading of F&M makes it clear that this story is false. It is conceivable that Tuchman believed the story when she first wrote it, but it is not possible that she still believed it when the second edition of her book was issued. It is the belief of this writer that Tuchman fabricated a false story of how the British obtained the text of the Zimmermann telegram In order to conceal the fact, they obtained it by betrayal rather than by code breaking. And F&M, once again referring to the Zimmerman telegram, when all is said and done, the decipherment of the 7500 version of the Zimmerman telegram, even to the degree given in the Hendrick version, which was an alternative version, approaches the unbelievable. You know what else is unbelievable? Barbara Tuchman is the granddaughter of Henry Morgenthau Sr. Who is Henry Morgenthau Sr.? I've actually covered him before in other reviews on Palestine Bookshelf. He was sent to try to make a separate peace with the Ottoman Empire during World War I. Keep in mind, the Ottoman Empire had been drawn in as one of the central powers, and if a separate peace had been concluded with the Ottoman Empire, who were not interested in continuing the war, that would have meant that the British would have no control over Palestine, and the idea of the Balfour Declaration would have been insensible because they wouldn't have been in control of it. So Henry Morgenthau Sr. is sent to try to make a separate peace, but he's intercepted by Chaim Weizmann in Switzerland before he ever gets to Turkey, where he had been an ambassador before. And he's persuaded not to go forward because the Jews cannot allow the Ottomans to continue to hold on to Palestine because then they can't make their own deals with it. So they cut the U.S. out of a separate peace with the Ottomans. They cut the Allies out of a separate peace. They have to keep them in the war so that when they lose, they can take the land from them. Barbara Tuchman, being Henry Morgenthau Sr.'s granddaughter, draws a straight line of why would Tuchman lie or participate in a cover-up about how the Zimmerman telegram was concocted and decoded. Well, if she was part of the Zionist love train that was acceded to by Henry Morgenthau Sr., who was happy enough to just go on with whatever Weizmann said and not go for a peace with the Ottomans, well, then you can see why she didn't make the changes to her book despite access to new information which contradicted her account in a gross manner. So, disappointing for me because I like Tuchman. I'm still going to continue to read her, but it is clear regarding the Israel-Palestine issue, she is compromised. And so I'll have to read her work regarding these issues with a closer eye. In any case, as I said before, if you'd like to get a copy of this article, it's free. You can find it, link via the description. If you liked this video, consider hitting like, subscribe, sharing this with people who are interested in those hidden corners of history. We're all very familiar, potentially, if you're on this channel, with what the Balfour Declaration was. But how did we get to the Balfour Declaration? That's where you get to interesting little corners like this one. If you'd like to thank me for this video, please consider using the Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal links. If you'd like to support our work on an ongoing basis, there's links to Patreon as well as YouTube membership. If you'd like to buy a book for the future, not all the reviews are on reports like this. Very often, actually, I review books and I review films via live streams. And you can find those books on my Amazon wish list, which is linked also in the description. Find books on there. The ones that are related to Palestine are obviously for this channel. If you see something not at all related to Palestine, that's for my main Stephen Heiner channel, which you're welcome to go check out as well. And a reminder that when this channel gets monetized, we are moving closer and closer to that possibility. When it does, all of our profits will go to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which helps Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. You help us move towards monetization by watching as many videos as you can. If you watch them once, watch them again. All those hours count towards qualification, and forward them to other people who they can also pledge to watch them. Until next time, enjoy your reading.